right, today we're tackling one of the most powerful symbols of the 20th century, the Berlin Wall. But this is so much more than a story about concrete and barbed wire. It's really a story about a city and a whole world that was literally split in two. Okay, let's get right into it.
Just picture this. You wake up one morning, ready to go about your day, and you find your world has been sliced completely in half. No warning. That was the shocking reality for everyone in Berlin on August 13, 1961. People trying to get to work in the western part of the city, they didn't find open streets, they were met with barbed wire fences and armed East German guards. Just like that, the city was sealed off. And this separation? It was instant, and it was brutal. Every path to the west was severed. They cut telephone lines, they welded sewer pipes shut, they even bricked up the windows of apartment buildings that were right on the new border. 4 subway lines that crossed from east to west were just shut down. One minute you're living in a single city, the next you're a prisoner in your own neighborhood.
To the rest of the world, this looked like something out of the Middle Ages. I mean, who builds a wall through a major modern city? So you gotta ask, why? Why would anyone do this? Well, that's the big question we're gonna unpack. And the answer doesn't start in 1961, it starts years earlier, in the rubble of World War II.
Yeah, to really get how this happened, we've got to rewind the clock all the way back to the end of the Second World War. You could almost say the first stone of the Berlin Wall was laid the very moment the victorious Allies decided how to carve up a defeated Germany. And that one decision, well, it set the stage for a decades-long Cold War stalemate.
So here's how it went down. After the war, Germany and its capital, Berlin, were split into 4 zones, controlled by the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. Now, Berlin itself was deep inside the Soviet zone, which made things tricky. Tensions flared up fast. Churchill famously said an iron curtain was coming down across Europe. Then, the Western powers merged their zones into what they called Trizonia and introduced a new currency, which basically split Germany's economy in 2. Stalin's answer was the Berlin blockade, a huge gamble to try and starve the Western allies out. It failed. By 1949, it was official. We had 2 Germanys, a West and an East. Now, this division created this totally unique, completely unsustainable situation, especially right there in Berlin. It led to 2 things: a massive crisis for the East German government, a huge exodus of its own people, and a very dangerous ultimatum from the Soviet Union.
And when I say massive crisis, I mean it. The scale was just staggering. We're talking about 2.5 million people who fled East Germany between 1949 and 1961. A lot of these folks were doctors, engineers, skilled workers, the very people you need to build a country. It was a catastrophic brain drain that was threatening the entire existence of the East German state.
So why was everybody leaving? Well, they called it the Berlin loophole. See, you could live in East Berlin, where the state subsidized your housing, your education was free, healthcare was free, but you could work in West Berlin, earning much higher wages in a much stronger currency. People called West Berlin a candy store, just this glittering showcase of all the consumer goods you couldn't get in the socialist East. The pull was just too strong to ignore.
Facing this disaster, the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, decided he had to force the issue. So in 1958, he dropped a bombshell, an ultimatum. He basically gave the West 6 months to sign a peace treaty that would recognize East Germany and get them to pull their troops out of West Berlin. And if they refused, he'd just sign his own treaty, and their presence in the city would suddenly become illegal. This was a huge, high-stakes political gamble.
Now, there were tense negotiations and a big summit was planned for May of 1960. But right before it was supposed to start, bam! The Soviets shoot down an American U-2 spy plane deep inside Russia. The US denied it at first, which just made Khrushchev furious. He then produced the wreckage and the captured pilot. The summit blew up right there. Any chance of a peaceful deal was completely shattered.
So by the time John F. Kennedy is president, the whole situation is at a boiling point. And when he got the news that the East Germans had actually started building a wall, his reaction was pretty blunt. For the West, yeah, the wall was an ugly symbol of communist oppression, but it solved the immediate crisis. And the grim reality was, as Kennedy saw it, it was a way to avoid a direct military fight that could have easily spiraled into a nuclear war.
So the wall went up, and what started as a makeshift barrier of wire and bricks quickly turned into a deadly, permanent fortress. So now, let's take a look at what life and death was really like along this concrete reality.
You know, in East Germany, they never called it the Berlin Wall. The official government name was the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart. The whole propaganda line was that it was a defensive shield to keep Western spies and fascists out, not a prison to keep its own citizens in.
And what a structure it was. It wasn't just one wall. This thing was a 156-kilometer-long system. It had 2 parallel walls, and in between them was the death strip, a horrifying zone with anti-tank obstacles, tripwires, and beds of nails. All of it watched over by more than 300 guard towers and 11,000 soldiers. Just a few months after the wall first went up, the entire world held its breath. At a border crossing that would become infamous, Checkpoint Charlie, the 2 superpowers came literally face to face in one of the most terrifying standoffs of the entire Cold War. I mean, just look at this. 10 American tanks were staring down 10 Soviet tanks, muzzle to muzzle, for 16 hours straight. Both sides had snipers in the buildings, soldiers were ready with anti-tank weapons. Everyone was just waiting for the order to fire. This was it. A direct confrontation between the US and the USSR. One wrong move, one nervous soldier, and World War III could have started right there.
But even with that kind of danger, people were absolutely desperate to get out. Over 5,000 people actually made it across, and the ingenuity was incredible. They dug tunnels, they flew homemade hot air balloons, some even just smashed through weaker sections with armored trucks. But the risk was just immense. East German guards had a shoot-to-kill order. Over the wall's 28-year history, it's estimated that at least one person died every single month trying to make that crossing.
For almost 3 decades, that wall stood as this unbreakable symbol of division. But when the end came, it came fast, and it was driven by a clash of huge personalities and a historical tide that nobody could stop.
This quote right here from Erich Honecker, the old hardline communist leader of East Germany, it tells you everything you need to know. He didn't see Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms as progress. He saw them as a deep, personal betrayal. Honecker felt that Gorbachev was just abandoning the entire socialist project and abandoning him in the process, which basically set the stage for the whole thing to come crashing down.
And crash down it did. There were these massive pro-democracy protests all across East Germany. And then, a government official, live on TV, made this completely bungled, mistaken announcement about new travel rules. Huge crowds immediately surged to the checkpoints. The border guards were totally overwhelmed, they had no clear orders, and eventually, they just opened the gates. Just like that, the wall was gone.
But the story after the wall is really complex, and it's worth taking a second to look at a critical viewpoint that emerged from the Russian perspective. According to this view, there were promises made that weren't kept. Of the 15 billion German marks promised for withdrawing Soviet troops, they say only 8 billion ever showed up. The grand vision of a common European home was replaced by NATO expanding right up to their doorstep. This perspective points to a comment by the West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl that he would have paid 100 billion for East Germany, which led to this bitter feeling that the country was sold for a sandwich.
So the key takeaway from this point of view is pretty stark. While the rest of the world was celebrating, Russia's only tangible gain was souvenirs, little pieces of concrete. And in exchange, this argument goes, it lost its entire buffer of allies in Eastern Europe and watched a rival military alliance march right up to its borders.
And that leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question. Was the fall of the Berlin Wall a simple, clear-cut victory for freedom and democracy? Or was it also the event that ended one kind of Cold War stalemate, only to lay the groundwork for a new, and maybe even more complicated imbalance of power? That's a question that, honestly, history is still trying to figure out.